Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Christy and Charlie here from CS2. On today's podcast, we have Melissa Meinert. She's the Director of Demand Generation at SalesLoft. And today she's going to be chatting about her tips and tricks for supporting an SDR team operationally and pretty much everything in between for the tools they use and what processes you can create. And we're really excited to have you on today, Melissa. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. Well, I'm excited about this episode because SDR operations, I've talked about it in the past, but it's just like one of my passions. I've always loved working with those teams and still continue to do that. I think there's no better kind of relationship between the operations team, demand generation team, and the SDRs because they're one of our biggest customers. So, and you working at SalesLoft, I think you can give us also some tips and tricks into how to support them, especially if you have a sales engagement platform. But before we dive into that, could you just give a little bit about your background, Melissa, and how you got to where you are today as the Director of Demand Gen and what you do at SalesLoft?
Sure, would love to. So I've been at SalesLoft for about 4.5 years. As the Director of Demand Gen, I'm responsible for our account-based marketing team, our marketing operations team, as well as our inbound SDRs. Our outbound SDRs live within the sales org, but I love having inbound under me because it makes me that much better of a partner to outbound, being able to really see their day-to-day and then being able to take that to the other team and really bridge that gap between sales and marketing. Prior to SalesLoft, I spent most of my career in partner marketing, and that's kind of how I fell into the ops world. There's so much with partner marketing that's overlapping between both marketing, sales, and ops when you have so many interjunctions of teams collaborating together and tracking attribution. So I naturally fell into the ops world after that, and joining SalesLoft, took on the operations plus a demand gen team.
So how's your experience been with that alignment with those three teams? You've got ABM, you've got ops, you've got SDRs all within your team. Like that must be there must be so many benefits to that. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you found that? And is, not everyone has that. Sometimes SDRs are completely in sales, and any opinions you might have on the best place to put SDRs.
Yeah, what I love about my role here at SalesLoft, having those three groups, is I'm kind of the marketing team that is most directly tied to sales and revenue. So it's kind of like the one team that when it's something sales related, we are there and have their back. We partner together and are very much aligned. It really makes it easier having like the one team tied to sales as one team versus split up in different groups within marketing. But having inbound under us, it was something new that came about a year and a half ago. They were originally aligned under the sales org, and we brought them under marketing so that we could really see what was impacting their sales cycle, hearing their calls of people coming through the website, requesting a demo, requesting to talk to sales, and what they thought they were requesting versus what reality is. I think helped us as marketers understand what people in the market were asking for, and then change our messaging so that everything across the board could be more aligned to what we were seeing people demanding new sales tools and what they wanted.
Yeah. And I think I feel like some people could say that you can get that alignment even when SDRs are in the sales team, but I still feel like there's something really to be said for actually having them in the same team, right? So it sounds like you went from the old way of doing it to the new way. Was it really kind of a switch that went off and something just changed quite quickly with them reporting into the different team? Or was it more complicated than that? Was it a gradual process, taking them on, or how did it actually go down? When you actually went through that change?
It was a quick decision. And I think that it probably maybe 2 months in, when we started realizing how big the impact could be, we saw that our inbound team just didn't have as much maybe enablement as the outbound team had, because since the outbound team had so much mentorship from AEs, They had a lot of what they needed to kind of grow in their careers. And the inbound team is a lot more process centric than outbound a lot of times, because of the flow of taking in leads and constantly taking calls back to back to back. So being able to understand that they were so much more process oriented, and also a lot more consultative than outbound. Outbound SDRs were very much so, trying to outbound SDRs were so much trying to sell why sales engagement was important, and inbound was really trying to intake what problems that prospect was having, and seeing if we were a fit, or if we weren't a fit, we're recommending other tools in the sales tech space that might help them solve their problem. So that process and consultative kind of viewpoint of inbound was so separate from the rest of the sales team. So bringing them into marketing, where we had a lot more tools and data to give them to be able to make that process super efficient, is where we really saw, like 2 months in, it really clicked, like this was the right place for them to be. And then just hearing everything that they heard in the market and be able to translate back that to what we were doing in our campaigns.
Yeah. So do you have someone that basically manages those inbound SDRs, or is that you, or how does that work? And what's that relationship like? And how do you create a relationship with like the SDR manager if you're in operations?
Yeah, I didn't originally. So originally our team was 3 when they came under me, and I overnight became an SDR manager. So that was a huge thing that I never thought I would ever do. I often joke about it because someone literally in the office a year and a half ago in passing was like, "Did you hear you're taking on inbound?" I was like, "I knew it was possible, but here we are." So I became an SDR manager overnight, something I never thought was in my career path. And I loved it more than I could have ever imagined, because it finally kind of closed the full circle gap of sales and marketing, and I felt like I could see it all. Our team has grown now, and now we're a team of 7. So I do have an SDR manager under me, who was actually one of my first hires when I brought in the inbound team. So she's now managing the team. And the relationship is great. I'm very process oriented, very operations tech minded in a lot of ways. She has a lot more sales perspective, a lot more around messaging and coaching. So that relationship has been really awesome, because we balance each other out in a great way. And I'm very thankful that she's in the role that she's in, because she's done a lot for us.
It must have been kind of crazy to take them on, because it suddenly clicked when you said a year and a half ago. That would have been probably just as everything went remote. And now you're in a position that you hadn't done before, managing SDRs, but then you can't. It's such a like a. I know it's people are probably adapted now, but it felt like in the past you really needed to be like around each other to like make sure that was working, and being able to like walk over to the desk, see how they are, have them communicate with each other, just like leaning over and chatting to each other about best practices. How did that go down for you? How was that experience?
You're exactly right. It literally was February last year when the team joined. So we got to have one beautiful month together in the office, and then we went remote. It did change. I think the first few months were difficult, especially because we hadn't like built up a strong team bond immediately. I think that's something that's really fostered in person a lot of times. But as we started to get closer, and I started to understand like what their pains were and like what they were experiencing prior to being on my team, I think it built a tight bond really quickly once we were able to share what they were seeing, what I was seeing, and then being able to fix it. I think, being able to help one another is the easiest way to build closeness as a team. And I think that's what fostered it. And I'm thankful now that the world has adapted, and we all are able to make these bonds a lot easier, quicker remotely than we were at first. But I think SalesLoft has a really strong culture in terms of like who we hire, like really smart people, really intelligent people who just foster collaboration. So I think in our hiring process, we're hiring people who innately want to build those bonds. So that's helped a lot.
That's great. You touched on one thing, and I think this is a very good segue, because we want to talk about like what are some of the biggest pain points that SDRs have. first, and then also chat about like things that maybe you've done to alleviate them. But let's focus first, like, and maybe that's what you uncovered when you first took on the team, but what were some of those biggest pain points? Or maybe also, what do you see as big pain points across your customers that bring on SalesLoft? Because I know you also have like will sometimes collaborate or work with or consult some of your own customers. So yeah, can you take us through some of those?
Of course, yeah. I think for both inbound and outbound, it's like a big pain point is not having easy access to data or understanding where to go to look for it. And then not having a process or a tool that like gives you a process. I think that's the beauty about a sales engagement platform, is that you can create a process so that they know what to do when they wake up. I think sales can really be difficult when you're kind of like putting your finger in the wind and like hoping you're choosing the right accounts, or you're hoping that you're calling and emailing enough. So having access to that data, or someone who is saying like, yeah, it does take this many calls or emails, or yes, like you do need to look here to find the best accounts to work. I think tends to be the biggest problems I've seen across the companies I've worked at and with our customers. So being able to have the data, understand how to have access to it, of like, does this fit our ICP? Should I actually be tackling the account? And then after deciding if it's actually accounts you should be tackling, having a way to find process around covering those accounts that you chose to work. So using a sales engagement tool, as well as really sticking to the playbooks and the messaging that your enablement and marketing team is putting out, it is hard for a lot of teams, especially when SDRs, sometimes this is their first job and they're still trying to figure out what I have access to so many things, like where should I start? And having one place is kind of like the source of truth of like how I start my day and how I do what I do helps them so much.
Yeah, I've always thought about sales and SDRs in particular, just coming in and it just being kind of like a blank slate, and just being like I've been kind of told about these different tools or data or things to do, but like, where do I start?
Yeah.
And it seems so overwhelming, like to think, okay, I've got to make these numbers and I don't know where to start. And you could totally see how someone would be like, maybe to do some false starts or just spend a lot of time just like trying to figure it out themselves. But that's where like good leadership, like, what you're trying to do, to give them kind of like that place to start, give them the data, give them that process. So I'd love to dig into that. Like, what are some of the processes and programs that you've developed to help them in their job and help them really do their job better and more effectively?
Yeah, and I said also, like, one of the biggest problems is not having the data, but I also think a huge problem is having too much data. That's the one thing I kind of figured out, is taking that and being able to point to like, here are the 3 or 5 things you need to look at, versus, we live in a world where everyone thinks they have intent data and their intent data is better than everyone else's. And we all throw that into Salesforce and we're like, have a great time. Really, that's what we're doing as marketers. A lot of times we're like, yes, and some were like, it's a lead score of 100, and some are like, it's hot. Here's a hot pepper mixture, like all of these things. Yeah. I think consolidating that down to the few that matter most, or even like what we did internally, and this, I think everyone does a little bit different, but we kind of created one field that's a formula field that consolidates all the intent data into one score. So we're like, here's a source of truth. I think that was the biggest process change that we made for the SDRs that helped guide them, versus, some were trusting one data point versus another. Some liked this just because of the way it, some used a number, some used like an ABC, whatever it might be, but consolidating it into one kind of consolidated source of truth of, is this account a good account to work, really helped their process and being able to rank where they should spend their time. And then on top of that, and this was a score of 0 to 100, so very much like a grade. We actually then created another score using all of our data from SalesLoft of how heavily are you working the account, also 0 to 100. So 100 being like you have multiple people with multiple calls, emails, different types of touches, 0 being you haven't touched this account at all. But then they can kind of stack rank of like, here's an account that has a ton of intent, it fits our ICP, but I'm working at it like a 5 out of 100. This is where I should spend time so they can really cross-reference of like, how good is it versus how good am I working it? That was the hugest process change that we did that helped guide them and where they should spend their time, because it's hard. Like Salesforce is, for a lot of companies, a bottomless pit of accounts, and being able to cipher through them it is the greatest, I think, tool we can give sales teams and pointing them in the right direction.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, where not only are you giving them the score of, based on intent signals, but also how well are you working that? And then you can cross-reference that and go, well, this should be an account that I should be really working hard. And then, or I see this account, I'm working at the right amount. And then I can kind of like move on to the ones that instead of just like continually doubling down on the one that you've already done enough work on, and then you're ignoring all the ones that you need to do more work on. That's a really good point. I like that a lot.
Exactly. It helps with coaching too. It helps with coaching too with managers, so they can be like, you're not hitting your number, like what about these over here, so it helps them.
One thing I'd love to dig into is, how do you develop trust in these scores and the data? Because I often have found that people can trust it at first, or there's lots of different scenarios. They trust it at first, they find one example where it wasn't perfect, and then they don't trust it anymore. Or they come in and they're already cynical with data. Maybe they went to a company in the past and it didn't really work out for them. So a lot of it is always trying to build that trust. I'd love to hear how you've approached that.
Yeah, I've experienced the exact same thing. I've built scores before that have died so fast that they, barely saw the light of day. So I've experienced that. The way that this system we found has gotten the most trust around it was building it in lockstep with our SDR and AE managers and kind of having them spot test as we were building it. So we would kind of, build our algorithm and then say, okay, here's 30, can you spot check these and say like, yes, this feels right. And then we would, dial back certain things if we found that we were ranking something high and that we maybe shouldn't have, that they didn't agree with. And when we had the manager buy-in, that the score felt like right to them of what they should be telling their teams, that's when we actually then, instead of having marketing roll it out, we had sales enablement and the sales managers roll it out. I think that a lot of times marketers are like, I built this thing, it's amazing. Like, I want to, tell you how amazing it is. And I think that sometimes that's where we might lose trust, because then it feels like marketing built it for marketing. I want them to feel like we built this for sales with sales. And I think that's where the trust comes in. So if their manager has said like, yes, I've spot tested these, I feel strongly that this is the way that you can guide your day. It is how we win and build that trust. And I've built a million different, scores that I've rolled out and been super proud of. And I think sometimes the more boastful we are, they're like, did they build that for marketing? Did they build that for us? So I want them to feel like we built it for, not feel like we did, we built it for them. And I want them to know that we did.
That's brilliant. Yeah, really getting them involved. That's a really good move. And then, letting the sales managers kind of take the credit for it, or be the ones to tell them about it. I think that's some really good advice that I don't see many other companies doing that, actually. A lot of it, at times, it is marketing going, oh, I'm going to get, here's the score, throw it over the fence, sales, use it.
Yeah.
Instead of, like you said, getting sales enablement to do it, get the managers involved in the process early, so they actually feel invested in this. Like, they want it to work because they've put time and effort and care into it themselves.
Yeah.
Really great move.
Definitely. I think the next thing, given you work at SalesLoft, we did want to get a little bit of your expertise around how to best use the sales engagement platform, especially for companies who already use market automation. I think we've seen some bad practices in also then trying to use the sales engagement platform, kind of like market automation, which I think defeats the purpose. But can you explain maybe for our listeners, like how a market automation and a sales engagement platform are different, but also where both can be best used along the funnel?
Absolutely. Yeah, the way I love to explain the key differences is marketing automation is truly one-to-many. And also, there's not a person behind an email that comes out of marketing automation. Like no one receives an HTML email and be like, oh, there's Steve on the other side. I'm going to reply and Steve's going to help me. We all know it went out to thousands of people and, we're part of the database. And then sales engagement, on the other hand, is truly one-to-one. There's a person on the other side who, cares about what they're trying to either sell you or help you achieve. And they do some similar things when you think about just the concept of email. But the biggest thing is the person behind it and the intent behind it. So, a lot of times marketing automation is used for the people who may not know what your company does. So maybe educational, or truly just like when you think about newsletters, or like we have webinars coming up, I want to invite you to something that's for all the people. And then SalesLoft or sales engagement tools are for a person on the other end to show you what value they have that's relevant to you and your company. And so that's really the key differences, and they can work together in a lot of ways. I think so. Market automation is normally more entry level funnel, or more like the newsletter kind of concepts, like keeping customers, prospects engaged on new features, new events, etc. And then sales engagement is more of like, okay, who I am, and now we're ready to talk as person to person. It is really the difference between the funnels. But the great thing is, because they both talk to your CRM, you can create automations between the two. Just like most people use the forms within marketing automation, if you were to fill out a form on the website, you could then tell SalesLoft or sales engagement tool to immediately send them an email from their designated rep of like, oh, I saw that you requested a demo. Here I am. I'm your person. Here's my calendar. Let's chat now. So you can really have it be a true funnel, in the sense of like talking to the people where they are at the moment and when it matters to them from the right platform. But I think some marketers assume that sales engagement is going to take away from what they're doing in their emails and marketing automation, and really they're two different messages for different audiences at different times. But that doesn't mean that they may not overlap or be used at the same time to send messages.
Who do you advise own the sales engagement platform? Because I see there's always so many companies approach it differently. It could be the marketing ops person, the sales ops person, a sales leader, demand gen person. Is there a right person to own the platform?
Yeah, I think it depends on your company structure and your company size. We see our customers differ quite a bit. A lot of times at smaller companies, it might be jointly like that, a marketer and a head of sales together kind of jointly owning it. And we tend to see, as you get bigger and you have like a more grown out sales and marketing ops team and sales enablement team, we see a lot of times sales enablement owns it, because sales enablement is normally taking the messaging from marketing and then creating like what is the the playbook that is going to be used. I don't think there's a right person, but I do think what's important is that the person who is owning it is taking in all the great data and putting it to action, because your sales engagement tool is going to tell you what messaging is working, like what emails, what time of day best to call, how your reps are doing. So as long as you have a person on the other end who is like, I have this data and this is something I can use to then either change my sales process or change my messaging, whatever best is going to really help get to the desired endpoint. As long as you have someone who's able to take that and then take action on it, I think is most important. But it can be often a mix of people who collaborate. I think that's what's important. What we've been talking about in sales and marketing alignment, like it shouldn't just be one person. It should be a collaboration, and everyone feel like, yes, this is the right thing that we should be taking to market, because this is what we're doing. We're taking, our company's value to potential customers and current customers.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you see people do wrong with their sales engagement platform?
I think just not doing enough, maybe like testing is something I often see, sort of like talking about, it's important to have someone on the other end saying, okay, I see this is working, I see this is not working, taking the data and utilizing it. I think people, they're like, great, now I can put a process in place. They put a process in place and kind of walk away and they're like, sales, have a great time. It's important to like take a step back and say, is that cadence working for that team? Is it not? And testing the differences. I think that's the biggest mistake I see it. Or people taking emails that they sent from marketing automation and just dumping them into sales engagement and thinking like, this worked great in marketing automation, it's going to be awesome here. But again, like the platforms are used for two different things. So you can't just assume that it's going to be the exact same the metrics you're seeing in that system.
One thing I've seen, well, actually, I've seen two things. I'd love to get your opinion, but I think the two biggest things I've seen within sales engagement platforms is, and both make them feel a little bit like a wild, wild west in a way, but like creating too many cadences or sequences and having like one's just like personal to an SDR, and then you end up with just an abundance of like, 200 on at the same time or even more. I have to say, I've seen people with like more than that. And so I'd love to get your opinion on that. And then two, when do you think that there's like too much automation? Because I'll see that some of the sequence will just turn into so much of it is automated. It kind of takes out the personalization. And then the SDRs just end up dumping a bunch of contacts into it all at one time and just like calling it a day and like doing their calls. But what do you think are your best practices to combat both of those?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's definitely the concept of too much. And that's when you can't really decipher what's working and what's not. Like, I do think testing is important, but like once you realize something's not working, like we need to archive it and then just stick to, the 5 or 10 that the team is utilizing at the time. And while it is great that people can create their own, you get the best metrics when you're seeing a team use a team cadence and you can see what is actually working versus like you have 5 SDRs who 5 completely different cadences and you really can't tell, is it the SDR that's working or is it the cadences that's working? So that's an importance of kind of the team concept of keeping it simple for them. And I do agree on the automation point too. I say automate when speed is crucial or when there's something that needs to be absolutely repetitive. Like I think automating when someone requests a demo or requests a certain piece of content, like, yes, like let's automate that. Let's send it to them. That's the perfect concept because they want it now. We all are, creatures of we want everything very quickly. And so I think that's when it's important to automate. Or when it, like I said, something repetitive. So like maybe a cadence ends and then you want to add them to like a long-term nurture cadence. Like let's take them out of the super personalized one and then maybe put them in a long-term nurture cadence that's like 1 touch a month for a long period of time because they didn't respond to us. And we just want to kind of, keep making sure that we're touching base. But sales engagement is meant for the sales rep to be personalized and to be a person on the other end. Marketing automation is called marketing automation because it's automation in it, and we don't call it sales automation for a reason.
Yeah, that's a good point actually.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel like marketers have struggled with since the beginning of marketing automation is they have such a powerful platform that can very quickly, set up to send a lot of emails out of it, and different teams can be enabled to do that. And what often happens is you have this insane calendar of communication to different audiences, and it's very hard for kind of like a mission control or like an air traffic controller to come in and make sure that the messaging that's going out is right, it's in kind of like a way that makes sense, the customer experience is thought about, and because there's just like so many people with a vested interest in like getting their email out. And then I think with the rise of sales engagement platforms, there's another tool out there that now can also send emails to the same people.
Yep.
And I feel like companies now just have that additional struggle where they go, and we see this and we audit this sometimes with clients, where we come in and we'll like take examples of leads or like kind of the general process, and we'll see, okay, well, this person comes in database, they get like this email out of the marketing automation platform and this email out of sales engagement. Then they go into like a marketing nurture and a sales engagement nurture, and they're both kind of like conflicting, like kind of saying different things. And then they start getting these webinar invites, and then like they get another like email from like customer success because they signed up for the product.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, how do you? It's a hard nut to crack, but I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you rein that in and get that understanding on what's going out, make sure the customer experience makes sense from an email perspective and like an engagement perspective.
Yeah, so what we do internally is we actually start suppressing we use Marketo in our market automation system, contacts that have a lot of sales touches. So just looking at how many activities they've had in the recent month, we suppress those from kind of like any educational webinar or any those type of things. The only thing we'll send them is if there's like a new product launch, new feature, something that might be important to them knowing in the buying process. So we suppress them because we feel as though them getting communication from a person is more likely to have a positive experience than getting messaging from a not person on the other end in marketing automation. So that's how we've kind of tackled it. There's a lot of ways you can, especially if they're a current customer. I think sometimes it is easier to have flows that are in marketing automation taking care of those communications. And just when it comes to like your main POC, contacting them through SalesLoft, but the people who are just users receiving the messages that have, all of the lengthy information they need about what's new with your product from marketing automation, and then just the one person who's responsible for kind of the, your internal instance being contacted through SalesLoft via person. There's a lot of ways to tackle it. That's how we've done it. I think, but it also just depends how diverse your product line is. I think we're lucky at SalesLoft that we have one amazing platform that does a lot, and we don't have a ton of different SKUs and products we're trying to sell. And I think that's where it becomes a little more difficult for larger companies that have so much crossover of what they're selling to different customers and when.
Yeah, and it probably goes back as well to your previous point about making sure you have the right stakeholders who have that interest and ownership in the platform, and they are coordinating well. And because like what you said there, okay, we're going to suppress some marketing when sales is doing this, and kind of vice versa. And it just needs kind of thought, right? And some companies might not have the right people owning the right platform, so they kind of don't think about it, and it just ends up being kind of like Chris's point of the Wild West, and everyone's just doing their own thing. So making sure you have all of the people on the same page and everyone invested, working together.
Completely agree. And that's where the sales and marketing alignment and sales ops even too is so crucial to be talking about who's talking to who and when and agreeing on it, because otherwise we have that Wild West situation.
Definitely. Awesome. Is there anything else, any closing comments from you, Melissa, that we missed out on your tips, or any final piece of advice for our listeners?
I think that the main thing I would leave you with is like, be thoughtful and don't be afraid to over communicate with whether you're in marketing or sales with the other person on the other end. I think that sometimes we think it's too much and they may not want to know, but there's so much that every team can collaborate on and then come to better agreement. So don't be afraid to reach out more than you already are, so that you can really build the best process and funnel for your prospects and your customers.
Great. Yeah. I love this episode. I thought I had some great tips for everyone out there in ops working with sales development teams, but also just in general, or using a sales engagement platform. So thank you so much for sharing your tips. And if you like this episode of Forward Thinking, make sure to share it with your with your friends and colleagues. And we'll be sharing a link to Melissa's LinkedIn profile, so go and follow her there. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you next time on Forward Thinking. Have a good one.